welcome to the Community Preservation Committee meeting of February 4th, 2025. I'll start out the meeting as we always do by doing a roll call of our members here and just going in the order I see you on your screen. So Ed, if you would state your name and your appointment.
Ed Larner, appointee from the Concord Housing Authority.
Thank you. Nancy. You're on mute, Nancy. Sorry.
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission appointee.
Thank you. Eve.
Eve Eisenberg, Select Board appointee.
Thank you. Paul.
Paul Baum, Recreation Commission appointee.
Bill.
Bill Kermez, the Natural Resources Commission appointee.
Diane.
Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee.
Thanks. John.
John Kratzley, Select Board appointee.
Thanks. Sue.
Sue Felshen, Planning Board appointee.
Thanks so much. And I'm Burton Flint, Select Board appointee. I will quickly go through the agenda tonight. We do need to get our warrant article buttoned up tonight, but we will begin with a brief discussion on the application, or the out-of-cycle application we received from the Concord Carlisle Regional School District. And then we will have the warrant article consideration, public comments, and then we've got some minutes to approve, one set of minutes. Hope everybody had a chance to look at it. Now, some of you may be wondering why we've got a brief discussion of the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee application on the agenda, since we gave that some pretty complete consideration at our last meeting. We had a vote, and it was decided that we would not move forward with considering that application. And in the intervening period between the last meeting and this one, we received an actual application from the school committee. And I suggested that we would put it on the agenda so that the committee could see the application. And I wanted to have just a brief consideration of it. I feel like the committee's already made a decision on this. We were short one member last meeting, and we had this tie vote to not move forward. But I think we've given it some consideration, but we might consider whether we want to provide any sort of support on a go-forward basis and the like around that application. I hope you have all had a chance to look at it. It's a long, there's a lot of information in there. It's a long application. It's both describes the scope of the project. There's some discussion as to why it would meet the special funding criteria, the extraordinary circumstances criteria. And there's also some letters of support and the engineering assessment that they had completed. I would note for folks, we had some discussion on it last time around when and why we could consider an application out of cycle. And this is most definitely would be out of cycle because, of course, applications were due several months ago for this fiscal year, and those are on page 12 or 13, I believe, of our procedures manual, and they're laid out pretty plainly and pretty clearly. And they really point to is this an opportunity that would come and be gone? It's like a land acquisition, loss of a historic building, and the like. So let me ask if anybody has any questions or comments on the application.
You mean on the application itself or considerations of the application?
Diane, I think either. I don't think I'm going to try to hem you in too much.
Well, I think it's personally, if I can speak, I think it's a much better presentation than last time. That was very clear. And so I appreciate the work that was put in, and I think it would be a great application for next year's cycle in the normal range of things. You definitely need bathrooms. You need them for people who need handicapped accessibility, disability. You also need them for people who don't. So that makes sense, and I think it would be a great application in the normal run of things. I don't see it as an opportunity that'll be lost by not moving forward at this point. Personally,
okay,
that's what.
Thank you, Bill.
If I can just procedural thing. I want to just comment on the voting. You are correct that at our meeting, it was tied 4-4 and we decided not to proceed. And that was the official vote. Subsequent to that, as you know, I did email you and I had changed my mind on that and it went to an abstention because I was definitely conflicted. That may not have no bearing on the decision here, but I just want to go on the record that occurred afterwards. And you know, if you want me to explain that, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. I just want to go on the record.
Okay, so an abstention. Thank you for clarifying that for everybody. Okay, Diane.
Thank you, Paul, so much. And thank you, Burton, for allowing us to have this discussion, which I think is absolutely imperative. A variety of issues present themselves. Bill, of course, technically you're right. I mean, will the world fall apart if we don't do this year? But we can't tie the hands of the committee next year. We have absolutely no idea what will appear next year and what kind of imperatives will be presented then. And so to suggest that, oh, well, it can just be done next year, I think is, I don't mean to suggest that you're being irresponsible, but I think is irresponsible on the part of this committee. I think that we have a variety of imperatives right now. I've used that word, I think 3 times, so I better stop using it. We have a variety of insistencies that emerge from my perspective. The first is that we have a town reeling from heavy tax burdens. And to have the school committee have to go to the town, which is what they will do, to go to the town to ask for resources and money to make this happen, I think puts an undue burden on a town that is already struggling with the taxes and the tax burdens. And the second thing is to let that money sit fallow, which is what it would do, earns almost a negligible in kind of interest rate, to let that money sit fallow when it's so obvious and clear that the need is there, that the reason for doing it, that our commitment to it is clear. I mean, we have, I think, a fiscal and emotional responsibility to our town to do this now and not to in any way constrain the committee next year with the kind of the imagination that, oh, of course they'll pass it next year. They may not be able to. There may be things that emerge that they must respond to. So I'm not worried about precedents. I'm worried more about responsibilities and the kind of I think of it really as a moral responsibility to support our town and to support the needs of the school, and not to let money just sit there while we hang on some technical constraints. And I would urge us to support this.
Thank you, Diane. Nancy, you didn't have a chance to speak at our last meeting.
Yeah, I've spent some time with this today, and you're right, it's a huge proposal and a lot to absorb. I just want to go back to another time when I was on the board, when there was an out of calendar request to go back.
Oh.
And we turned that down. I also, I am worried about precedent, and I'm worried about fairness. Perhaps others should have an opportunity as well to submit out of calendar applications. But I also wonder about paring down the proposal. Is a concessions operation really necessary? The bathrooms are what seem to be the most urgent. The concessions operation, the training manager's office. So I'm wondering if there's not an opportunity to pare down the total cost. And the way I feel about it right now is that I would not want to create this precedent.
So Nancy, that it sounds like there would be some issues in some investigation, some digging in you'd want to do into the application, the scope of, like we typically do. Well,
I think I can't tell you, I can't recite to you the whole 58 pages or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I did spend some time with it, enough to, I think, get the idea and the scope and sense of urgency. This sense of urgency seems to be primarily for the bathrooms
Right.
And there seem to have been other alternatives, alternative 1A and B,
Mhm.
that were rejected, but might be suitable in the short run.
Okay, but you'd have questions at any rate. Sue?
Yes, well, I agree with Diane that we can't tie the hands of next year's committee, and that's why I think that we can't set a precedent for them and for all future committees that out-of-cycle applications get approved based on how much our hearts tell us they're worthwhile, or whether the town is undergoing a particular funding crunch. We have rules for a reason. I won't go on because I said this last time, but I don't think those are valid reasons for accepting this proposal.
Thank you, Sue. John?
Yeah, what I lost in the hurry and the sort of speed with which we started on this at the last meeting is this idea that with extra money, we ought to be able to use it again. I mean, Diane's right. It shouldn't sit there.
Mhm.
This, of course, comes as a one-time potential application to use extra money. I think we should adopt the policy where we open it up when there's extra money and take in applications. Does that make this one an appropriate exception to start a new policy? I think that's complicated. It would need some discussion. But it strikes me one of the important lessons out of all of this is, should we be willing to open up our application process again? This one would be a perfect example when we have extra money, and make sure that more folks have a chance to get that money.
Thanks very much for that thought. Eve?
Thanks, Burton. I was pretty impressed with the study that was done in November, and I understand now that although this amenities building has been studied and thought of since 2018 or before, they really just kind of nailed it down recently. And so I do think that it does fit the special application process criteria, especially since you may say that they could just do this next year, but what I'm seeing right now in my industry as an architect and in construction, this project is going to be more expensive next year, no matter what, period. I mean, just month to month, things are getting more expensive. It's pretty astonishing. And we do have an unprecedented situation right now where we have this extra money. So it's hard to talk about precedences going forward when we have this unprecedented situation with our money today. Does that make sense? So those are my thoughts. I appreciate the application. I wish I knew a little bit more about the budget. The budget's outlined in the November study, and maybe the applicant or Dr. Hunter or whoever can comment on that. But I am very much in favor of examining this and taking it very seriously at this time, and not pushing it off to the future.
Okay, thanks very much, Eve. Let's see. Ed, you've
Yeah.
not had a chance to speak on this one.
Yeah, last month I pointed out that it seemed like a big chunk for us to be undertaking $750,000, half of the proposed thing. But on the other hand, I felt like it was a worthwhile project, and I agree with Diane that it may it's just going to cost more in the future. So and we have the ability to do it. So I continue to be somebody who a little bit skeptical about how much we have to take. I know on the Thoreau project that we're undertaking, they raised quite a bit of money from outside donations rather than from this. We're looking at $1 million from between Carlisle and Concord CPCs. So I just wonder if it's I don't know how it may be too late to ask for where there could be additional funding sources. So, but I am still positive about doing this, regardless of the precedent.
Okay. Paul, you got a chance to speak, but if you have anything brief to add.
Well, last time I spoke, I just explained my vote. I want to explain a little bit more. I'm in agreement here that this is an unusual situation and there is a precedent. That's why I was kind of torn between the two. But the larger issue that has come to mind, and it's been mentioned here, is that the CPC is part of a larger enterprise, and that's the town. And the public has already paid the tax burden on CPC, and that money is there. And for us to reject this and kind of kick it over to a town warrant article, while the money is available, and I think we all conceptually support this. Conceptually, it might need some modifications. I think that would be. We won't be good stewards, financial stewards, if we allow that to happen, since the money is available. So I'm worried about this being kicked over to a town warrant article and creating dissension in the town and questioning of ourselves and the whole process. Now, we do have a process. We established that policy, and we could change that policy. I think John's comment, but maybe you ought to look at that in the future, is right on. But I think maybe if we can get an extension on the warrant article submission, that's something we haven't mentioned yet, because that warrant article is due tomorrow. We would need to get an extension from, I'm not sure who, town moderator, from a select board, and that as far as I know, that hasn't been requested. So that might be the pivot point. But I just want to explain why I'm in support of this now.
Got it. Thank you very much. So here, I'll thanks for everybody's input. I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got every committee member's weighed in. Last time I voted as something that I would support this. I will tell you that now where we are, having had a vote that I think was fairly given, and it being and not having an application at that time, and having receiving an application for consideration for the first time the day before the warrant article is due, I would now be voting to not support this application this year, and the reason why is to some of the things that Nancy and perhaps John and Sue alluded to, which was setting the precedent. And I don't mean to be sort of punctilious about, we've got this procedures manual and it's got these various requirements, but really we've got a process that this committee has followed for years and for decades around how we receive applications, and we consider them carefully. We look at them as a committee, but we appreciate that there might be special applications out of cycle. And one of the thing that jumps out, that failure to secure CPC funding, and I'm quoting from our procedures manual, will create a high likelihood that the project will not be able to be carried out for the benefit of the town. So in other words, it would likely fail, but for considering it out of cycle. And I don't think that's the present in this application. If we were, as John was suggesting, changing our procedures manual, is there a special exception, such as funds that otherwise would go would be let fallow, as to quote Diane, then that would be one thing. But I don't think that doing it sort of on an ad hoc basis, for me, it feels like the right thing. I also feel like this application is likely to have, Diane, John, people that have been on the committee for a long time have heard me talk about not tying the hands of a future legislative body in terms of when we've previously funded a partial commitment to a particular project. And I've argued that we shouldn't be doing that, and I agree. But I do think this is a project that would likely, considered on a de novo basis, have the strong support of a future committee. That's my view. Yes, Nancy.
I know I've spoken, but I just want to say also that costs for housing, costs for open space preservation, costs for any other major interest in the town will also increase. And so I don't think that's particularly unique. When we reserved this amount of money last year, there was a lot of discussion about the need for larger resources to be available to meet certain opportunities, for instance, to meet a housing opportunity or an open space opportunity. So given that, and given the idea that you could reduce the scope of this project, I don't know why why there's a concession facility that's needed there.
Yeah.
Or maybe the larger office space. So that's
Okay.
all. Sorry, thank you for letting me speak again.
And Nancy, to your point, one of the things I raised in the last meeting was that when it was identified that we the requested applications didn't meet the funds we would likely have available, representatives of the housing committee asked if they could amend their applications to request additional funds, and we said no. Once you've applied, that's the limit. That was going back to October or thereabouts, and so in that doctrine, sort of the fairness that some folks have raised, I think, in terms of considering one application over others. Diane, yes, please.
I promise I'll be brief. I'm disappointed, Burton, in your decision. I respect it very much. I respect everybody's deliberations because I know we've all thought about it. But I don't think this is a capricious or careless application. I believe that the schools thought they could not apply before, and then when they realized they could, that the CPC could cover this, then they thought, oh my gosh. And so then they tried to cobble together an application. So I think we need to take into account the fact that they didn't know they could apply. It's not like they were sitting around willy-nilly and suddenly thought, oh, well, maybe we'll apply. I mean, they really had been advised that it wouldn't work. I don't know who advised them, but I mean, I think that's not unimportant in our deliberations. They did a responsible thing. They discerned that it could be covered. And now they're making the application. And just one last comment, and that is that I despair of living in a world, and I loved your look, Bill, when I said I thought it was a moral issue. I despair of living in a world where we are constrained by rules constrained by rules that in the end don't really make a lot of sense.
Diane, that we ought to change them at some point, but not in the middle of a debate about an issue in front of us. And the rules are the things that allow us to have that kind of a freedom of discussion later. It's the thing we have to turn to. I think
I understand that.
That's the moral argument.
You know, the strict construction is the opposite of how I live my life. You know, for me, it is that, you know, you need to be able to have imagination and a freedom of mind and imagination, that is what gives breadth and vitality to everything we do. But
watch out for Washington, D.C. But anyway, no.
Oh, well, no,
Okay.
no, I'm not going there.
Right,
You're right. Okay.
Many applicants.
Let's zoom down.
say that.
Judge Grassley.
Well, I just wanted to finish with a plea again that we consider seriously and take up the policy that would have allowed us to do this when we have extra money. It seems to me that's the middle ground and the answer to what we learned from this.
Yeah. Eve?
You, Judge Grassley.
You're right. I've been studying this special application process all day, and also the plan and all of its components. And I don't think that we have to change our policy. I think that this project fits into the special application process. I think that I'm happy to make that these 6 criteria are met by this project. And I just want to say, I actually feel super fortunate that we have the opportunity to consider this project at this point, to barely squeak it in under the bar, because I think everybody likes this project. It's not really, it's not controversial. Like, we need these ADA bathrooms. Whether there is a concession stand, and I'm sure that the applicants could make the argument for why they considered that and not other things. And I realize that not everybody goes to the high school every day like I do, so you don't really know how far away this building is from the rest of the buildings. So that's kind of at a disadvantage for folks on the committee. But I feel super lucky to be able to consider it, and that's what I wanted to bring up.
Thanks,
I don't
Eve.
think it changes our policy or changes our rules to consider it.
Can I ask then, with respect to, just running through these, the first requirement, in addition to meeting the standard requirements that any application must meet. They were unaware of the opportunity to undertake the project, and I would grant that they thought that they could not submit the project. So fair, they've met that. The proponents, the next one being the proponents, I have either a letter of intent signed by the current property owner expressing an interest to sell, or legal control or an option to purchase real property, and that's out of the scope since it's not for the purchase of property. Project is supported by one or more town boards with responsibility for projects of a similar nature. We know obviously the regional school committee as a town board is supportive of this, and I would imagine that if we went to the select board, I know the select board had the opportunity to weigh in their support, and they elected not to, but perhaps if we were in support of it, the select board would. Then I'm going to skip over the next one because I think it's going to be the focus of the discussion. Appropriation of CPC funding will contribute materially to the likelihood of success. That's undoubtedly present. The project holds a high priority in the comprehensive long-range plan or the open space plan, the historic resources master plan, or in any other planning documents currently accepted and utilized by the town. I don't know whether that is met. We would need to investigate that, whether this amenities building is specifically called in one of the master planning documents. The criteria, which I think is most germane, is that failure to secure CPC funding will create a high likelihood that the project will not be able to be carried out for the benefit of the town because the opportunity is of very short duration. Eve, you spoke of, well, we've got rising costs, but do you think that if we didn't fund this in this cycle and we considered it in the 2026 fiscal year cycle, that it would not be likelihood to succeed? There would be a low likelihood of success, I should say.
I guess it depends on your definition of success. In my mind, the part of the success is not being sued by ADA bathroom users. That's part of the success story. I could see from the application that these folks are ready to build pretty much immediately. Like they're talking about starting construction in the fall. I can hardly get many of my projects launched such that they start construction in the fall. So that's a very speedy timeline. So they're trying to close that gap where we might be getting sued or at bare minimum bad press. And then I understand that all prices are rising, but the experience that I have is really with the construction industry and just the price of lumber right now. The lumber yards are already starting to jack up their prices right this minute. And 3 of my projects in the past 3 days have been put on hold because of this. So I think because of the strange times that we're in, I'm just going to throw that out there, that I don't know that it would not ever be able to be built, but it certainly wouldn't be able to be built in its configuration in this application. So that is my argument.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Lots of thoughtful comments. I think everybody, I think I could agree with each and every one of you. Which maybe is like, maybe I'm Jello trying to be nailed to the proverbial tree. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Nancy. We had an 8-8 vote at our last meeting. I think I've expressed that I would, at this juncture, probably change my vote into the negative, or 4-4. Thank you, John. Paul's gone from being against to abstaining. Which way would you go? And because I think that we can avoid a vote across the larger committee.
I would vote to wait and to hope that the scope of the project could be reduced. I think there's opportunity to reduce the scope of the project.
Thank you. And to that point, what Nancy, some of your earlier comments is that we would want the opportunity to give this consideration. We have less than 24 hours to submit our warrant article to the town, so far as we know.
The deadline was February 19th. Is that on? Yeah. So.
Anne, let me ask you, as somebody who's sort of keeps us in check administratively, what's our schedule here? I mean, we certainly don't have any meetings prior to the warrant article submission, I don't think.
Right.
Right. The draft warrant article is due tomorrow, the 5th.
The draft. Okay. Yeah.
But yes, the final one isn't due till the 19th.
Right. And so to your point though, Nancy, like there would want to be presumably some discussion, some inquiry about it. I heard Eve talk about, an appreciation for where this is located in relation to the school, which might be something that we would, people would have some insight from a site visit and our typical procedures. we frankly just don't have that here, right? Here we
Right,
are.
right.
We've got an application to submit. I think we've given this really good consideration. I think we've been very fair to the applicants coming in. I think it's regrettable that they were given information that they suggested they couldn't submit. And if I were voting on this as part of the regular application cycle, this would be the article that I would probably be most in favor of. But I think we've considered it, and I think that they would need to consider it as part of the next application cycle. There's a possibility that there could be a special town meeting, and they could make the argument that it should be considered as a special application outside of the cycle. But they would be responsible for calling that, for organizing that special town meeting, and we would not, according to our procedures manual, are not responsible for advocating for that meeting. That's my view.
I would like to hear from Laurie and or Alexa, since they're here, just to hear if they have a
Yeah.
perspective that
Of course.
Was Burton finished?
Yeah, that's
thought
I'm,
it
I'm
was.
good.
I'm sorry. I
Okay, Diane. Yeah.
apologize. I did
No.
confuse it. Okay.
No, Diane, go ahead, please proceed. Dr. Hunter,
Yeah, thank
Alexa
you all.
Anderson.
Thank you all. Just a few thoughts, and I certainly appreciate your concerns over the process and such. A little more information on where we are in the project, I think, might be helpful just for point of reference. What you've received so far are the schematics. We are about to go into the 25% design phase because the Regional School Committee funded the design itself. So the committee's fronted $170,000 into getting to that place. So no design is final at this point. I think it's just really important to say that. And I know Barney's on from Carlisle, and I just want to speak to the fact that I was in Carlisle last week and talked with their finance committee, and I know their CPC is having the same discussion, admittedly on the timeline where they're in a different stage in the process because their dates are much later than Concord's. We got some feedback from them about the design itself that just got back to me today. So we're going to need to consider that. But I also think, when we were at the finance committee last week, it was really clear from the town manager and finance committee that Carlisle, I don't think, unlike Concord, has a big list of other projects to do. And we were urged to keep going on this for FY26 because Carlisle's got other things that are going to need to be priority. And if the CPCs in both communities could come together and help to offset what goes to town meetings, that maybe it was the right time and place. I do have concerns that if it doesn't happen now, admittedly, we're in year 2. We did this a year ago and pulled it from the town meeting warrant. We're trying now some other ways to come at it so that we're not asking for the whole amount. I don't know what the options will be next year. I know both communities have a lot of other things on the slate. And to Eve's point, the construction costs just go up and up. So there's always going to be these competing factors. What I do think feels urgent is the needs of this community and the needs of the people that we serve on the campus. The lack of bathrooms is, I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that, but it seems we're saying is a really big issue. You're out of plumbing code, you're in violation there. That could get noted at any point by the plumbing inspector, and you have an ADA issue. So I kind of feel like the time is now. I know the cycle is off, and I think we didn't understand that this was a viable project, and then the timing of the schematics and such didn't line up with the September date. Just for feedback from our seat, Thoreau was part of the cycle this year, but only because we realized we missed it. Our budget cycles run differently than what your timeline is currently. So I would also be in support of looking at those dates because we're getting geared up for budgets and your process is already closed. So I think, just a few points of note that I do think there's a timeliness to this that should be now. And I think the hope was that the CPCs in both communities could offset some, especially knowing that there's monies here in Concord. So I just wanted to be a little bit of the voice of Carlisle and just remind everyone this is bigger than, it's a regional project and meant to serve both communities and all the families and community members and students that spend a lot of time on that campus. So do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it. We were just urged by our regional members to communicate the perspective of Carlisle because, like Dr. Hunter mentioned, their chief concern is that next year in Carlisle with their CPC will not be viable.
Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.
Well, I move we accept the proposal. I'd like to see a vote.
Clarify, if you can, clarify your motion that we have a vote to whether that we would consider it or whether we would approve the application as submitted.
Do I have to do the approve before, consider before approve?
Well, I think
I'm asking technically, I just don't know.
what I'll speak plainly. Are you making a motion that the committee should go through the process of considering the application further and perhaps asking questions of the applicant, asking for additional information, doing a site visit and the like, as we would ordinarily do? Or are you making a motion that we accept the application for inclusion and funding in this warrant article without further consideration?
Yes, to the latter. Beautifully
Okay.
said.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. I will go around with the vote of the room, just in the order you appear on my screen. Eve.
Yes.
John.
I could vote yes if we had a policy that we were from now forward going to take applications when we had excess money. I realize this one would be unusual because it has not arrived in an open process that was open to everybody. And I don't know that our board's ready to vote for an open process. So I'm kind of stuck. So I think I have to say no, because we don't have an agreement that we're going to take applications when there's extra money. This looks
Okay.
like one that could have fit that if we had a policy.
Very well. Okay, so you're a no. Right?
Yeah.
Paul.
I'm a yes at this point.
Okay. Bill. You're on mute. I read your lips, but you're on mute.
I'm afraid no.
Okay. Ed.
Yes.
Okay, and actually I just need to keep track here.
3-3.
Well, Bill, you're at we're 3-2, I believe. Diane, you were a yes, I presume?
And a yes, and I also just want to say, I don't think we're in violation of the state rule.
Well, are we debating or voting?
Yeah, so Diane, I cut you down as yes. Nancy?
Let's vote, people.
Sorry, Nancy, I apologize. I'm clinging to the edge of the table here.
Nancy?
No.
Okay. Sue?
I'd like to fling some extra debate in, but instead I will just vote no.
Okay, and I'm a no, for the reasons I said earlier. And Diane, I hope that doesn't mean we don't get to ride around it for our next site visits together. I know this is super important to you, and I would love to see this project happen. Personally, I would absolutely love to see it happen actually sooner rather than later. As somebody who has a rising or will be rising junior in the high school, who I spend a lot of time down on those fields. But I just feel that this is a project that we're really wrapping ourselves around the axle for this, when the answer is simply submit it next year and we've got a 12-month delay. I don't want to.
Yep.
It was a simple vote. Okay. Thank you very much, Alexa, and the rest of the members of the Regional School Committee for putting in the time and effort on the application. Obviously, you're hearing that I think everybody on the committee supports and believes it's a good use of town's funds. It's just that we don't have the time where we are in the process to give it full and do deliberate consideration alongside all the other people that would undoubtedly be seeking additional funding, as we already know from our housing advocates in town. Thank you very much. With that, Anne, I would ask if you could please go ahead and put, I'll walk the committee through a couple of items that have come up. So we have what should be a pretty straightforward warrant article to approve, but we've gotten some additional information around both how we should be dealing with required funding amounts for each category, as well as this question about a designated reserve versus an unfunded, a designated account. Annual, correct me on the exact terminology, versus the unallocated reserve. And I'll just quickly walk through that. So first of all, we have changed the categorization of two of the items, which were both previously listed as recreation, to be split between recreation and open space. Recreation and so that's the Thoreau athletic fields and the Giroux recreation area. One of the reasons for doing that is those are both sort of, I would argue, and I think John is our Paul as our recreation member would say, those really truly are split between both recreation facilities and open space facilities. And by designating it that way, based upon some advice we got from town council, we believe that we are meeting the 10% requirement that our funding go to open space. As you know, we've got sort of 3 categories in a subcategory in terms of the areas that we can spend funds on, but the requirement for spending at least 10% of our funding on each of the categories only speaks to the 3 primary categories. So it speaks to open space. It does not specifically mention recreation. Because these applications were recreation, we wanted to specify that they are 50% open space. Our town council thought that was the right approach. Paul, I think you weighed in suggesting that was the right approach, so that we meet that 10% requirement for open space. Paul, any other comments on that?
No, they truly are a combination of both recreation and open space. So we're not forcing the categories. I think they're appropriate. Okay.
Thank you. And the other question then becomes, the next question is we dug into the issues of these designated reserves. In the past, the committee has elected to set aside funds when we have been undersubscribed into a designated reserve, really in part so that we made sure that for larger funding requests, such as land acquisition, the money would be sort of banked there. We currently have a designated reserve for open space of $250,000. I don't remember whether we did that on the last funding cycle or the one prior to that. The Community Preservation Coalition advised that when we're spending money, what we really ought to do is to give ourselves maximum flexibility on go forward basis, is that we should spend our most restricted funds first, which would suggest that if we've got an open space reserve, that we should spend presently, supported that towards presently supported open space projects. I think it's maybe a little bit different in Concord, and that what we shouldn't be reducing that open space set aside. I think when we voted to do that, we wanted to send a message to town that we were preserving that for the acquisition of new lands in town, and that what we should be spending, we should be funding these projects not out of the open space reserve in the first instance, which would consume the entire prior year set aside, but that we should be just spending it out of the undesignated funds for this year. Does anybody have a question about that or an objection to that, or feel like we should? Yes, Eve.
I just feel like an idiot because I'm not exactly sure what it means to acquire funds for open space in Concord. Does it mean like a private homeowner puts their property up for sale and the town buys it, or what does that mean?
Yeah. Very typically it would be that, or the acquisition of a conservation easement or something similar to that. An example would be the Giroux property, which we funded in part the acquisition of that. So that was a owner who the estate of the prior landowner who elected to put it up for sale, and their funding came from multiple sources, as I recall. But we put the CPC put together some 900,000 or something like that over a couple of years to help fund the acquisition. There's also the acquisition of the Assabet River Heights land. That was a housing and conservation, an open space conservation project that we put a lot of funding towards. So it's exactly that, generally the acquisition of property. And historically, that was the biggest funding category of the town, which is why we have so much open space across Concord.
So just one
And-
more question.
I was just gonna
Sorry.
say, and Eve, that property came up with the proviso that we had a limited amount of time to either secure that or let it go to a different venue.
The
So there were-
Assabet?
Yep, the Assabet. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
So for example, MCI is state-owned property. Burton, did you go away?
I'm here. No.
Oh, okay. That we could be, it could suddenly become something that we would spend that kind of money on, like purchasing part of the MCI land next year?
That's I mean, I suppose that's within the that's possible. I'm not involved enough in the deliberations to know whether the state is talking about this the town having to buy portions of it. But maybe as another example, Paul, what's the current status of the nuclear metals land? Is that something that the town would end up having to acquire?
Yes, and that's probably a better example. It's not clear what that acquisition cost would be, but that's probably a better example because that's going to face a town 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And whether that price is zero or whatever, I think that
Right.
would be an application of this, of open space money.
Yeah.
I like to say also from Natural Resources Commission's position, this happens fairly frequently in towns where a property will become available and developers are ready and we have to be ready if we find it fits into our plan to move on it.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think
Exactly.
and that's what I think that money has been set aside for it to help us to do.
Right.
Yes.
Which will bring us to our next discussion on undesignated funds versus Anne, you're going to have to help me. I can't keep the language straight, but a designated reserve, I think is a terminology. But let me just to close that out. The issue we're considering is, do we first draw down that 250 that's currently existing in an open space reserve, or do we allow that to continue to sit there? The drawback to that is it just means that's money that's somewhat restricted for a future committee, but a prior committee, of which many of us were part of the Constitution of, decided that made sense, and we just let that continue to ride. Does anybody have an objection to just letting that continue to ride? Because the way the draft warrant article is currently written, that would be the case.
I prefer.
I would support that.
Okay,
Me too.
great.
Yes.
All right. Great. Okay, that brings us to the next thing, and I don't want to go too deep into the details because this took me a while to dig into. I know Paul spent a lot of time with it. We were advised by the Community Preservation Coalition to do something that we haven't done in the past, sort of out of just a sense of prudence. So apparently there's an issue where if this came to the forefront because we have it's kind of a big chunk of money that would be left over at the end of the year, as we're all very familiar with now. That they said, well, you should be putting your leftover money into a
budgeted reserve.
A budgeted reserve. Thank you. That's the terminology. A budgeted reserve. And essentially what that means is for the next year, it is sitting in an account that would be available if there was a special town meeting to consider an extraordinary application. So as an example, since we have one in front of us, let's say the school committee application met the requirements for an extraordinary application and proceeded forward. And there was a special town meeting in November, and we were able to consider it and do that funding. It apparently, and we hadn't considered this before, it needed to be in a budgeted reserve account, or else it wouldn't be accessed. It could not be accessed even through a town meeting vote between the period from when, and it's what, but
When the
once
tax rates are set in October,
the tax rates are set in October, and then what's the next date?
and
Oh.
then June 30th.
June 30th.
Mhm.
So there's what does that work out to be? An 8-month window where that money cannot be allocated through a special town meeting or otherwise. It's
Interesting.
a municipal finance thing. I think Ann and I would both confess we don't actually know exactly why, but we've been advised by the coalition and town council and
Does,
our finance professionals with the town that is in fact the case.
does this sound like the special account that's trying to be set up nationally?
Are we going to buy Bitcoin with it, you mean?
I forget what that's called. It's a special.
Oh, you mean the
enterprise
sovereign,
account.
the sovereign
Sovereign
wealth
wealth
fund?
fund?
Sovereign
That
Wealth
would-
Fund?
Is that
The
what
one
it's
that would
like?
require us not to be in debt first?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're
Yeah,
gonna make lots of money on it. Are we gonna get interest
I-
on special reserve, budgeted reserve accounts?
Oh, that's a
I
good
would
question.
I would love to chat about sovereign wealth funds and national politics, but
Okay,
in the
sorry.
interest of time,
I'm
I
sorry.
But
think
Nancy
that-
asked a good question. Do we still get interest on it if it's in a budgeted
Yeah.
reserve?
It's
boy,
really an important question, actually.
yeah.
Yeah, well,
And do you
I'm an
do you
I
happen
don't
to
have
know?
the answer to that.
expert.
I think it's okay.
Is it an investment account? I don't think so.
I will tell you this. I did not ask the question. I don't think Ann asked the question specifically about interest. But when we were asking why to do this or why not to, the answer we got was, well, it gives you flexibility in case there is a request that comes through out of cycle, right? There was no mention of, but you would lose interest. So this is like all the different ways accountants look at, are you on a cash basis? Or are you on a, whatever basis? This is essentially designating it, creating an account. The town would create an account and call it a budgeted reserve, but I'm presuming it is actually sitting in the same bank account as everything else. This is an internal bookkeeping matter, to the best of my knowledge, but it is a matter that is important with respect to the way the municipal finances can work. Bill, you might have some experience with this. I see you raising your hand.
Well, not because I had experience with it, but I do have a question about it. Does in any way do we lose control over that money from the town?
No.
No.
We don't. Not in either case. These are
Neither
CPC funds. They can only be spent in furtherance of CPA, in accordance with the CPA process, as designated by the CPC, and then approved through our legislative process, which is a town meeting or an annual town meeting or a special town meeting. We don't lose any. I mean, I've asked that exact question. Is there any drawback to doing this? And the answer I've been told is no, but the CPC should decide if it wants to do this.
Okay.
Yes. Paul, you've dug into this. Yes.
Well, and just to clarify, and I think you said this, but I just want to make it clear. As of July 1st, that line that says budgeted reserves becomes undesignated. So it stays as a budget reserve until the end of the fiscal year, and then it becomes undesignated. That doesn't mean we lose it, but it just category change.
Which would mean, so when we talk about, so we're designating it for the fiscal year 2026, right? Which runs from July 1 of 2025 to June 30th of 2026. So for that period, it would be in a designated reserve.
That's right.
And so presumably our future committee, if they wanted to keep funds in a budgeted reserve, as opposed to an undesignated reserve, then they could roll it forward. Right. Yeah. We are in the situation where right now, if we wanted to access these funds, let's say there was a project that was not a open space project for less than $250,000, because that's in a reserve account. Let's say there was a project that came along and we wanted to go through a special procedure and allocate funds in accordance with a town meeting that would happen in April, a special town meeting. We apparently could not tap into that money because within this fiscal year. That's the scenario.
Oh. So we got CPC could be overridden by town meeting vote.
Oh yeah. All of this is
can, all of it
Yeah.
can theoretically, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So by putting it
It
into
matches.
by putting it into a budgeted reserve, that doesn't mean that we can, through a committee vote, then appropriate it. We can recommend appropriation to our legislative body, which is the town meeting.
Okay.
Right? So this does not make the money easier to spend. It makes it spendable outside of the regular budget category. What I never knew before this, because it's never come up, is that the money that's sitting there, if we wanted to do an extraordinary application, is not touchable for 8 months of the year, because of this municipal finance process. And I wish I had a reason why that is, but it is what it is. We've heard from 3 sources: our town finance people, our town council, and the Community Preservation Coalition. Sue.
I just wanted to clarify, town meeting can only override us if there are changes within the 4 corners of the article. And I don't actually know whether the town moderator would rule that switching money between a budgeted reserve and undesignated reserve would be outside the bounds of the article, or only in one direction or only the other. I just wanted to mention that.
Well, it's an interesting thought process, right? Because generally they say the money that's, you've got a dollar figure on the article, and we can't increase it, but it can be decreased.
Yeah, that was the
So
point.
yeah. So what we would be saying, so what we've historically done is we've said, okay, let's say we had $2 million, and just for ease, it's to make it easy, we had $1 million worth of projects. That article would be for $1 million, and that other $1 million would just sit there and it wouldn't be considered by town meeting at all. What I'm describing would be, we would have a $2 million article. 1 million would be going to projects, and $1 million would be going to a budgeted reserve. Somebody could stand up at the meeting and say, we don't want a budgeted reserve. We want it to be locked up during that period of time because of the municipal financial rules, or they could reduce one of the planned appropriations for a particular project. But what they couldn't do is say, hey, you presented a $1 million article. How much money did you have left over? Oh, $1 million. Well, we want to make that a budgeted reserve. That could not happen.
Right.
What I was actually, the scope of the article.
What I was actually wondering about is, suppose we had a $2 million article and $1 million went into budgeted reserve X. Could town meeting actually switch that to undesignated, or could they change it from budgeted reserve X to budgeted reserve Y? But I'm not sure that this is really a very operative issue.
No, I so.
Well,
I can't imagine this coming up at town meeting, but it could.
Well, actually, it raises a really intriguing point, and I almost hesitate to say it out loud. Could somebody say, well, you've got a $2 million article, and instead of budgeted reserve, I'd really like you to spend it on an amenities building?
I think the moderator would probably rule that as outside the 4 corners of the article, because somebody reading the warrant would not believe that money was to be spent on a school amenities building. That one is really far afield, and I can't speak for the town moderator, but I betcha.
Well, you speak with the wisdom of a future town moderator, Sue. I think you're probably right.
Absolutely. All in favor,
Roger's
say
rules.
aye.
It's an interesting question. I mean, literally, in my 7 years it's been on this committee, we haven't had this discussion before, just because we haven't been here. Let me bring us back to, and Anne, if you could throw up at this juncture the draft article, because we do need to get it approved tonight. I'm just mindful of the time. Okay, so there's a little bit of a change up top. These numbers below, well, we'll get to the numbers. So instead of specifying specifically that it's for the, in the preamble here, that it's for the amount that the fixed figure for the amount of the projects, it talks about funding essentially the projects listed below, together with committee administrative expenses, community preservation projects, and other expenses, with each item to be considered a separate appropriation. And this is following, Anne, if I'm not mistaken, essentially the model article you got from the coalition. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And you'd see, and you say, and I think the key words here is it says the vote to appropriate or reserve from the CPC fund. So that's where we get into this additional reserve. We then have the articles, all of which we've previously voted on here. None of those numbers have changed, coming to $1,450,000. We then have a historic preservation reserve, which we do need to do because we don't have historic preservation projects that would be sufficient to or do we? We've just got the one for $50,000 for $103,928. So that would be going into reserve, and that would be a reserve that would be fixed. It wouldn't go away at the end of the fiscal year, just like our existing open space reserve. And then we've got that line for budgeted reserves, which is essentially the prior year fund balance plus the FY26 fund balance for a total of $1,341,998. So that's the difference, is that we're calling it a budgeted reserve, which means it would be available if somebody came along and said, hey, I've got an extraordinary out of cycle application, and we would be able to consider it in the months of October, November, December, January, and up until town meeting, or excuse me, up until July 1. Questions on this? Sue?
Yes, don't we have to say which reserve or reserves we're budgeting it to? Can we really
No.
just say random reserve?
This is a whole nother thing, Sue. So previously
Okay.
there are category reserves. These are the things I've learned. There are category reserves, and once you designate something to a category, you can't undesignate it from this category. This budgeted reserve means we've decided that the town ought to be able to spend this if it decides it needs to through the appropriations and legislative process, but it's not designated to particular category. This is
Okay, so
this
there's
is very
really
if
no,
this is sounding extraordinarily administrative, it is it's because it is.
yeah, okay, so there's really no downside to budgeted reserves, except that we're not 100% sure if we earn interest on budgeted reserves, because supposing somebody comes along and submits an out of cycle application to use the budgeted reserves, and the CPC says this is a terrible application, then we would vote that we think it's a terrible application. And, you know, the town could always override us, but probably not.
The downsides are at the very furthest realm of possibility, it seems to me.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Paul?
Just a point of clarification, in addition to what's on this sheet, there's still 250,000 in a previously designated open space reserve, right? So this isn't all the money we have. Is there anything else that we have that's not on the sheet? Or am I correct, first of all, that this 250,000 that is already in a budgeted reserve for open space?
Defer to Anne on that.
Yes.
Anne, did you get that?
Yes,
Okay,
that's
thank you.
correct.
Shouldn't that be
Okay.
shown on this too?
Yeah, why isn't it on the form?
Well, because I think it's already been part of a previous.
It's already been approved. Yeah, it's already been
Right.
appropriated effectively.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And my question is that the only funds that are not on this sheet? I understand why they're not on the sheet, but is there anything else?
No,
It's
the only other funds that are not on the sheet are existing appropriations to specific projects. So if any of those projects gets closed out and there's extra money, then that would get returned. But right now there is none.
So aside from the active projects, the 250,000 in open space reserve is the only thing not on this here.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Got it. Thanks.
I mean, just a point, you know, the community housing, there's $240,000, which it was not spent on the Giroux house, which is returned.
Right.
And we didn't know exactly how to, you know, what we were going to put in reserves over, but it's similar to that. In other words, but that's in the 740,000 that's listed.
That's right.
Right.
And specifically, that came out of essentially undesignated funds. So even though it went to a housing project, when it came back, it became once again undesignated. If, on the other hand, we'd had a designated reserve of $240,000 for housing that had been contributed to the Duro project and it had come back in, it would have gone back into the housing designated reserve. But regardless of that sort of tag, designation, we did take $240,000 and add it to what the Housing Trust asked for this year, 500, and we came out at 740. So we got to this, happily got to the same place, but I just was describing that so you to understand how the money flows.
We didn't, rather than try to deal with it as we're dealing with open space money, we just don't, we're taking care of it because it went back into housing. So
right, right. So a lot of discussion about really a very small issue, but I just wanted to point out this is why the article looks somewhat different this year, because Anne reached out. She got guidance from the coalition. The coalition provided us a lot of information, provided previously to Paul and myself. We'd take a look at it. Town council weighed in. I don't see any drawback to going ahead and calling this a budgeted reserve. And in fact, it's a bit of a drawback if we don't, because unbeknownst, I think, really the whole committee since it's been constituted, we haven't known that we wouldn't be able to access that money if it came up in a special, for an extraordinary application. And perhaps in part because we've, to my knowledge, we haven't had one. Nancy, you mentioned there had been a prior application and it was rejected, but what I would suggest is that we go with this, with the edits up top, which were sort of in accordance with the what was suggested by the coalition. They did make one suggestion that some committees put their reserves on one meeting article and their appropriations on another meeting article to keep them separate. I don't know necessarily the pros and cons, except for the one con that would be somewhat different than we've done in town meeting in the past. And one more article is at least 5 more minutes that we're all sitting in the gym. So I would suggest we keep it as one. And see a thumbs up from John. And so I guess let me ask if we have a motion that
Burton, can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And if you
had her hand up for a long time.
Oh, I'm sorry. With this view on the screen, I don't see the hand.
Yeah, so, no, I don't see everybody too. That's why I spoke up. My question is whoa. All right. That worksheet was great. I'm also looking at this other worksheet that's dated 1/28, and it seemed to me that the budgeted appropriations amount was 1,430,000, which is what's listed in the other worksheet as a prior year fund balance. But the difference between what we're spending and what we have is 1.591. So there is like $400,000 left over still after that. Should all of it be in the budgeted reserves or just the prior year fund balance that was left from last year? That was my question.
I haven't checked the math. Anne, can you speak to that?
Sorry, Anne.
Let's see. So I checked it and double checked it. I may need to check it again, but there's the 1,430,000 you just mentioned in the prior year fund balance, and then here's the 341,568 left over in the current year fund revenues.
Do you have the worksheet, the draft community preservation recommendations? Oh,
yes. Let me see if I can pull that up. Just 1 second.
It's a good question, Eve.
I could have this totally wrong. I don't fully understand all this stuff, this accounting, whatever.
Numbers.
Can I ask an interim question? Like, is this likely to encourage more out of cycle applications, do you think? Does anybody know or have an opinion about that?
I certainly wondered the same thing. I was sitting here thinking, I don't see why I think it would.
I think it will certainly at least make people aware of the fact that there's an out-of-cycle application process. If anybody asks a question, right? For better or for worse.
Don't we want people to pay
there.
more? social insurance?
I mean,
Never mind, never mind. Take
And
my
I'm
hand.
just looking up at the worksheet that you put in the current meeting documents, that worksheet.
Yes.
That-
here
that got up there
we've done
today.
the two of them together.
And
So-
I actually just happened to notice it says January 28th, 2024 at the top of it. So maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing completely. But
Um, No, sorry, that is this year. So this is the worksheet that's up on the website currently, and it has the prior year fund balance 1,430,000, which is right here, 1,430,000. And then the projected CPA fund revenue 341,568, which is here 341,568. So I'm not sure what.
if you scroll down
Okay.
in that worksheet, do you see where where it says 1591998? Isn't that the difference between what we have and what we're spending?
oh, but that includes
No,
the
that's
open
this.
space reserve that's already
Exactly.
designated.
Yeah.
I see.
That's
Yeah.
here.
So
Missing
that
piece.
we don't, that once it goes into designated reserve, we don't need to redesignate it annually. It doesn't get bumped back into an undesignated reserve ever.
Gotcha.
That's,
So
yeah.
the 341,568 projected CPA funds revenue, that's also something that we don't touch.
But
No, so
341?
the money that, the total money that we will have in our accounts that is not going to a current project or not already in a reserve account is 1,341,000. I'm not going to do that math. 998. 1,341,998. So that's money that, if we don't say anything about it, it sits in an undesignated reserve.
yeah,
Gotcha.
What we're talking about is then if we make it a budgeted reserve, then that can be accessed through this special process at any time until the end of the next fiscal year, which would be July of 2027.
Now I understand. Yeah,
yeah.
thank you. So the 145,460 and the 1445926 add up to the nearly 3 million. Okay,
Yes,
sorry.
right.
Well,
And down.
Got it.
yeah,
So-
Nancy, do you have a question first? Because I've got one after you.
so
Okay.
it seems that this constrains our ability to be flexible with that reserve money in the future. And maybe we don't want to do that because it keeps it in the silos, it sounds like.
It doesn't keep it in a category silo. It can be funded once it's in a designated in a budgeted reserve. It can be used for anything that's fundable under the CPA.
I'm sorry, that was my misunderstanding then.
Yeah. So it's
So let's see.
so there's
You
a
can
there's a
access.
budgeted reserve and then there are category reserves.
Yeah,
These are all
okay,
things we
yeah,
haven't had to think about before because we didn't really
yeah.
know about them.
I
but-
understand the category reserves.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm lost as to what the benefit of this is.
Bert, I think the important part of this is that now we are in compliance with standard CPA budgeting.
Yeah,
And-
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
you know, so
okay.
we have to think a bit differently, but it doesn't constrain us. It may make it a little bit difficult, Bern, to explain it at town meeting, but I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I think so.
I will do it via charades and it will be very well practiced before I show up. Diane, if I may just go to Bill, he's had his hand
Well,
up.
I think it's the same question. I am wondering again whether this takes this money in a certain sense, not out of our hands, but it will lend itself to having more people. The thing that Nancy raised, applying out of the normal sequence. Because if we didn't put it in this budgeted reserve, if I'm not mistaken, this would just be available for us in the normal sequencing of our deliberations, correct?
That the following fiscal year, yes.
Sure, and it's only, I mean, it may seem like a long time, but you have some money in an open space reserve, you have some money in a housing reserve, which we needed to put down payments down. That's available, right? That money's available?
That money, well, we don't have a housing reserve. We just have an open space reserve. But
Okay.
yes, we have $250,000 available.
Okay, so we're opening up. I think we're opening up another process for ourselves. That's all, and I'm a little concerned about it. But okay. If you're all wiser than I and been here longer.
Well, I would argue the process is there. We have always had in our procedures manual an ability to come to the committee. What we haven't been doing is meeting the municipal finance requirements of actually making that money available, which I think we probably, if we'd have thought about the special process, had assumed was available. And I would guess that anything, I mean, I think having looked at the special procedures, right, it's really around land acquisition. It seems to be the one that it's designed around. And maybe we, to John's prior suggestion earlier in the night, maybe we'll rewrite that to provide more flexibility. But as it's currently stands, I mean, we're talking about land acquisition, and where nobody's acquiring land in Concord for $250,000.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah,
Right.
I know that. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Diane, thank you.
Which is in itself an alarming statement. It used to be a lot of money. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I am. You know, what this really does, however, is open us up for out of cycle applications. I think Nancy's right. And in the sense that, you know, and here I was arguing that out of cycle application within the context of the year was a reasonable thing, but it had to do with a very specific project. I would normally have been on the other side. And so therefore, I think that until we have rules in place that construct out that define out of process applications and its limitations beyond what we have at present, I think this does open us up. I can't see the reason you say, Burton, that you can advise that there's no negative for doing this. I think there might be a negative for doing this.
But Diane, we have a process right now, and that's the standing process. To John's point, we want to change that, but we're not inviting out of cycle applications that violate our policy. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it opens us up for anything different.
Okay.
John, you're on mute.
John, we can't hear you.
I said we have one narrow policy now, and yes, we're open to someone coming in under that. I think that's wise that we are doing this. I do think I would favor a broader policy that it may have to be time. It has to be probably time sensitive, or it could be wide open. But I do think slightly broader than the narrow set we have now would be worth discussing.
So
Yeah.
policy.
And I would point out that somebody comes with an out of cycle application. I think maybe we're worried about, getting, are we going to get bombarded with these things? Are we going to, is it going to be an administrative headache? All of these things, we could consider an application, but it still needs to go through a special town meeting, which we have had special town meetings, I think probably more years and not in the past few years, but that's not a small hurdle to get over. And it's not this committee that would be calling it. So it would be an advocate. In other words, I don't think we're throwing the door wide open to get bombarded with these applications. I think though that if an application did come along, that let's say it's the nuclear metals. I always worry I'm going to pronounce that like George Bush. Nuclear metals.
Nuclear.
So my brother was head of the nuclear trade industry for the United States, but I still can't pronounce it right. If something like that came along, we would want to be able to tap into that money, and it would be a shame if just administratively we failed to follow this municipal finance procedure to make it available. That's how I view it. I don't think we're opening the floodgates. Okay. I am going to then, Anne, if you could put it back up on the screen, we're coming up to 8:22. You could throw the article back on the screen as edited, which the edits reflect the changes from the last version that was posted to the committee website, I believe. Again, what it's doing is essentially creating these reserve buckets, the budgeted reserve bucket. I would make a motion that we approve this article for submission for the what's the language for town meeting 2025.
Second.
Thank you, Diane. You've got the green box around you, so I'm going to say you were first. With that, This is a little tricky going through who's on the screen, but I'll start with Diane.
Yes.
Okay, John.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Ed.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Thank you. Eve.
Yes.
Sue.
Yes.
Nancy.
I vote yes, with the understanding it's for that 1 year.
Yes. You mean the budgeted reserve you're saying is for 1 year? Yeah, it
Yep,
has
yep,
to be
that's what I heard you say.
redesignated at the end of each year, or else it rolls over into an undesignated
got it.
reserve account. Yes.
Okay, yes.
And I am a yes, which means we are unanimous in approving this year's article. So thank you very much for that. A very good discussion. And I know we're all slightly more wise to the ways of municipal finance as a result. That brings us to our final item for the evening, which is the meeting minutes for, let me just double check the date. I've got them open. I believe it's December 10th, 2024. Is posted on the website. Did anybody have any comments or edits to that meeting, those minutes?
Public comments.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of December 10th.
Thank you. Seconded. Okay, that was duly seconded by somebody. All right, Nancy. Do you
I
approve?
was just going to say, I'm sorry. Oh, yes.
And I may have gotten out of order that I skipped public comments. We'll get through the meeting minutes and then we'll go back to public comments. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. I didn't have the agenda open in front of me. I think of public comments is coming last. So do you, how do you vote on this motion?
Yes. Sorry.
John.
Yes. Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Ed.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Diane.
Aye.
Eve.
Yes.
Sue.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So that brings us to unanimous on the meeting minutes, and now public comments. We've lost our public except for Linda. Linda, did you have any comments, public comments you wanted to make?
Hear your explanation at town meeting for the new budgeted category.
You're looking forward to that. Well, the town moderator will probably give me the usual 20 seconds, but I will do my level best.
You might wind up on the consent calendar. That would save a lot of time.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, what a good thought, John.
Do you have to be the last article, Burton? How do the articles get numbered? Can't we be like number 2 or something?
I think they're numbered in order of people's interest.
Oh,
Highest
No,
to lowest.
wait a minute, but the planning board is always second to last before the CPC. Ow.
Yeah. I don't know.
It
Eve,
is-
I'll enjoy those evenings in the gym with you.
It tends to be grouped around categories or areas. And so
Yeah.
that's how ours ends up being in a cohort that is toward the end rather than toward the beginning. So
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
And we're going to be using clickers this year for all motions.
Are we using clickers? They approved that.
Well,
Clickers for
But-
everything.
who approved it? The study
I don't-
committee or the select board? Because I'm still hoping the select board will inject some sanity.
Well, that's what they decided. Clickers for everything.
the
Did you
select
think
board.
that's what they decided last night, Paul?
I believe so.
I didn't come away with the same impression. So,
Oh, okay, well,
but I could be wrong.
it was a crazy meeting, so maybe.
It was a
maybe
crazy meeting. So for many reasons. So, okay.
Watch the recording.
Wa-
Okay,
watch.
that's all
Right.
I got.
Burton, I just want to say thank you to the group for your tolerance of my my strongly expressed feelings. I appreciate your graciousness in the face of that. So thank you.
Oh, 100%, Diane. I sometimes feel like we start out with a list of applications, and most of the time we end up getting to approving all the applications. But I think the discussion along the way is really informative. So if that sounds cliche, like it's the friends you made along the way, I apologize. But I do think it was a really good discussion, and I will Diane, as I think as I was listening to each person tonight, I was like a weather vane going in various different directions. I hate, perhaps it's the indoctrination I had in law school that made me stick to the rule book. I don't know, but there you go.
Well, there's
Could we get some,
good
could we get
reasons.
some information about future meetings? Are
Yes,
we done?
please.
Are we?
Are we done? And do we have anything between now and town meeting sometime in the summer?
Sorry, I'll have to check the website. Just 1 second.
They're on the calendar. So that, but
I'm just looking. So we've got today's February 4th. For
March
some reason, it's
11th?
got March 11th and April 1st. And then we've got the public hearing on the 15th. Do we know what date town meeting is?
June 7th.
Okay. Well,
I mean,
John,
June
to answer,
2nd, I'm sorry, June 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and maybe 5th.
okay. So, John, we have meetings currently scheduled on the 11th, the 11th of March, April 1st, and May 20th. I don't anticipate we will need those meetings, and unless you correct me.
No, I don't think.
I mean, it's possible we could have a meeting to close out projects, or if there's any other administrative business for current projects.
well,
Do you?
Burton, just while the iron is hot and our brains are on the topic, John's suggestion about thinking about our policy might be
Yeah, that could be a good use of one of those meetings.
before
Very good idea.
before we all forget the angst and whatever we call it tonight.
We also have a
Okay.
draft plan we haven't approved yet, right?
I think that's the case. That's right, Eve.
We'll
And
have all this red junk all
so
over.
let's do this. Let's plan on keeping that next meeting on the calendar. And we will, well, to that end, perhaps
That's
we ought to
March 29th, did you say? I'm sorry, March.
11th.
let me,
Okay.
March 11th.
March 11th. Would
Okay.
anybody here like to take a crack at proposing? So we have a bulleted list of like 7 items that it needs to meet, right? And what I might argue is that first of all, that list should be an and/or list. So it meets one or more of the criteria, but not necessarily all of the criteria, because currently the criteria is really focused on I would argue land acquisition. But would anybody like to take a crack at crafting a different measure under which we might consider other applications? And what I heard tonight was around, if the committee finds itself sitting on a bit of a pile of funds that haven't been allocated.
Well, I could draft something because I've already banged some notes out, but I could only do it sarcastically, and I don't think that's what the committee wants.
Well, Sue, if you'll share them with me, I'll work with you on it.
Okay, I'll share
right.
something.
There you go.
Just making a suggestion, the topic of, I'll call it financial strain on the town. If, because that was one part of my thinking. Or what are actions that they create or ameliorate financial strain of the town otherwise? That may be some general topic to think about anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the direction that I was hearing people going on this. So if I could ask, then John and Sue, could you maybe, I mean, if there's another bullet or other edits to that, and it's in the procedures manual, I think top of page 13, that we could consider at our March 11th meeting, then we would keep that meeting on the calendar and potentially have both that for consideration and our plan document for approval.
So before you leave this topic, I just want to make sure I understand, because I thought what we were talking about is if we have excess funds in any year, we ought to spend all those funds up by the end at that year. No, that wasn't what we were saying?
No.
Never. No.
Yeah, never.
Okay.
Because Bill, we oftentimes have excess funds and we
Okay.
don't spend them. The real question was, I think, about out of cycle applications.
Okay.
That don't have to, where the strict construction rules might be a little more flexible.
Mhm, mhm.
So it won't depend on how much money we have available. So John wasn't saying that. He was saying we just should make it broader
Well, I think,
categories.
I believe what John,
Yeah.
speak for
that true,
yourself, but
John?
I thought what he was
Yeah.
saying is the town is under pressures, the constraints, and there's an out of process, out of cycle application that we have permission or not encouraged, but we have the opportunity to examine it.
John, is
Yeah,
that
some set of standards that would be a little more flexible than the current written set, which certainly focus on land. Some guidance along the lines that we've just been talking about stress on town finances.
okay?
And then we would consider these applications, but we would be the most important thing is we'd be telling the world that here's a set of what you have to meet. This last set was untimely, and in my opinion, I think only Eve felt it met the criteria. And we would then be better able to say to the world, we have this here, and we got this application, maybe we got 2 applications, and then we'd see if they fit or not.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
think this is super important for this cycle, especially since our town meeting is in June. That leaves two months, basically July, I guess the rest of June, July and August for people to get their act together and get an application into our process. And then we have 9 months after that or not that many months, but we have many months after that to consider them. There's just a whole lot of time in there where something like what happened to the amenities building folks could happen, and then they would want to be able to be considered.
Would you
Great.
consider changing the dates of the application cycle?
Well, that's an important discussion point. Would you have a fixed time period after we considered the first filed set? And then we knew that we had the money. Would you then say 30 days or 60 days after the final vote on the timely applications, and we determined there was extra money, there'd be a time frame by which the next set would have to come in? Or would you leave it fluid so that you wouldn't have a time problem, but you'd probably still have to set an outer limit of the warrant
Of course.
submission.
Yeah, I mean, the time limit is actually, you gotta look at the far end. We need time to deliberate and to
Yes,
go through the
Right.
process. We want to get the warrant article in, so you almost have to start at the end and work backwards. And town meeting this year is, I doubt if we're gonna stick to a June town meeting date. I don't think that, but
I
They
think
could
it's
be-
all about, it's because of the April 19th.
yeah, of course.
It could be a 1-year problem, but it may be a big problem this year. But it could be that we have like an early action college decision and a regular action college decision situation. Just something that I've been going through recently.
You've been
Well-
having kids apply to.
Or
This
could you-
this is the meeting. This
Yeah,
is
and
next
you
meeting.
folks will come back with something, I'm sure, but couldn't you just say like the deadline is X number of days before the draft warrant is due at town meeting? And make that true for all applications. So push all of them back so that they arrive at the same time. No, it won't work that way?
Not enough.
But I think that the dates have been set on the classic town meeting date, which has not changed a lot until this year. So I don't think, I mean, we could do that, Bill, but
I'm thinking well, yeah, okay. All right. Well, you'll come back with something for us, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, March 11th.
That's the March meeting.
Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you.
And
All right.
thank you for navigating that with such grace. You're
Yeah,
awesome.
you bet, Diane. All right. Thank
Awesome.
you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye,
Awesome.
everybody.
Good evening.